So we're looking at 1.3 in our homework, and we asked about question number 1. So, question number 1, we need to identify the type of number that it is. So first off, what is this? Is this real, or is this going to be non-real? Which one? Real or non-real? Non-real, okay? Then we ask ourselves, if it's non-real, is this pure imaginary? Yes or no? No. What would pure imaginary look like? Okay, pure imaginary would look like this. If I covered that one up, if I said minus 5i, that's pure imaginary. This one is not pure imaginary. It is non-real complex. Okay, it's not pure imaginary, so it's not this one. It's not just complex. They didn't write complex twice, but it should be answer D. Non-real complex and also complex. They just forgot to put the complex there. So it's going to be D, non-real complex and also complex. Is everyone okay with that? Right, so it should be answer D on that first one. They just forgot to list complex again. Question 8 on 1-3. So we're going to read the directions and we're going to work this one out. Write the number in standard form. So we need to separate out the real part, which is the A, from the imaginary part. So we have to split it out into separate pieces. So let's look now at question 8. So we've got minus 6 plus the square root of a negative 12 over 2. So this is what we've got. Okay, now we need to break up that 12. So 12 breaks down into 4 and 3, and 4 is a perfect square of 2 and 2. So we know that. Now, what's left over? Just a 3. So when I rewrite this, we have a negative here, so that's going to come out. So I can rewrite this as minus 6. 2 comes out. I comes out with it. Square root of 3. And that is all over now 2. We are not finished because we have to write this in standard form. So we rewrite this into individual fractions. And you can put the I at the end or I at the beginning. It's not really that important. And we need to reduce. Okay, so minus 6 over 2. Minus 6 over 2 reduces down to a minus 3. What about the 2's? They can cancel. And if we don't have a fraction, we'll put the I in front. Now, when we write this, we don't want to put the I at the end because you might think it's underneath the root. So most times, unless it's a fraction, we'll put the I in front. So that would be your answer, and that is in standard form. Does that one make sense as to what to do now? So split it up and reduce. And the I generally will go in front of the root, or if it's a fraction, it can go behind. So just be careful and don't try to make that more difficult than what it needs to be. 1-3 should be a pretty easy section. I know it's brand new, so it's got new terminology, but that's the only complicated part. So question 3. And this is in 1.4. We only did 1 through 5. And I made these multiple choice so you could check your answers. This way you know if you did them right or not. Because I know sometimes on some of these it's easy to think you did it right, but not. So let's look at question 3. So this is what we've got. We've got x minus 3 quantity squared equals 19. This is going to be solved using what's called the square root property. In mathematics, we work with opposites. Opposite of addition, subtraction, right? Opposite of multiplication, division. Well, what's the opposite of a square? Square root. Okay, we use opposites. Now, the one thing that we have to remember is whenever we take a square root, that induces a plus or minus. So we're going to go ahead and take our square root here, and that's going to add in a plus or minus. So what does that leave me with now? That leaves me with x minus 3, because those, the square and the square root cancel, equals plus or minus. Does 19 break down at all? No. And it's not negative, so there's no I either. So it looks like this. Now we need to get the x by itself. So I'm going to go ahead and add my 3 to each side. And that leaves me with x equaling now 3 plus or minus the square root of 19. Does that look like one of our answers? It does, doesn't it? Okay. You could split it out into the different pieces. It's definitely not A. We know that. It's definitely not B. Why is it not B? Here's a commonly made mistake. B doesn't have what? Plus or minus. So which one is it now? D. Oh, sorry, C. Because C has the plus or minus. So that one would come out to be answer C. And I made those on your exam. They're not going to be multiple choice, but I made the homework multiple choice. That way you could see if you did them correctly and know how to write them in the correct way. So that's why I made the multiple choice. Most things are not. Okay, I just do it for this section because I want to make sure we know how to write them correctly. Question 4. Question 4 is x minus 13 quantity squared equals 25. Well, what do we need to do? We need to get rid of that square. And what undoes a square? Square root. And plus or minus. 25 is a perfect square of 5. So now on the left, we have x minus 13. And that equals plus or minus 5. Now, all the roots are gone, and we're going to get 2 solutions because this was squared. So we should get 2 different answers. So let's write out our 2 equations to get our 2 different answers. So one of them is x minus 13 equals a positive 5. And we'll move that 13 over with addition. And so one solution is x equals 18. Right? You're going to get 2 different numbers. So one of them is x equals 18. What about the other one? Well, it's x minus 13 equals a minus 5, because of the plus or minus. We'll add that 13 to each side, and now we've got x equals 8. X equals 8. So those are my 2 solutions. And which one does this look like? It looks like answer what? D. But do you see how I broke that down and I got the 2 separate answers, just like what they have, right? 2 equations, and that's because of the plus or minus. Okay? Is everyone all right with how to solve that? So let's do some more. Any others out of 1-4 to look at before we move on and finish up 1-4? Okay. Well, if there's nothing else out of 1-4, out of 1 through 5, then we're going to move on. And we're going to talk about zero factor. We'll do zero factor, then we'll do the quadratic formula. And this goes with homework questions 11 through 15. So homework 11 through 15, zero factor. Now, what we do for zero factor is here's the steps that we use for zero factor. Zero factor, step number 1, you set to 0. Step number 2 is you factor. And step number 3 is you solve. Okay? You've probably done zero factor in your intermediate algebra class or your high school algebra class before. Zero factor doesn't work for all equations, but it works for a lot of them. So these are our step-by-step procedure or rules. Set to 0, factor, solve. So we'll start off with a pretty easy one. So let's go ahead and solve this. So let's see if we can remember how to solve this one. Now sometimes it's already set to 0. This one's already been set to 0, right? Now we need to factor. How many solutions can I have at most? Well, the highest power is going to tell you how many you can have at most. So what's our highest power? 3. So we can have up to 3 solutions. Now you may just have 2 because they might be a repeated solution, a double root. But this one's going to have 3 different solutions. So the first thing I would do is I'm going to try to take out what I have in common. When I look at all of these, what's my common factor, my greatest common factor here? These all have an x in common, so that's going to come out in front. And if I take that x out, what's left over? We've got x squared plus 5x plus 4. How do we factor out what's left over? This needs to go again. We need to get rid of all of our powers. So we need to remember how to factor this again. There's no number, but there is always a 1 in front. And you take the first times the last. So what is 1 times 4? 1 times 4 is 4. What 2 numbers would multiply together to give me 4? Add together to give you 5 in the middle. Multiply together to give you 4. Add together to give you 5. What 2 numbers would do that? 4 and 1. Okay? What do you know about the sign? What's the sign in the middle? Positive. What's this sign? Positive. So that means both numbers are positive. Now, I usually write the larger number first. I think that's just the easier way to work with it. So 4 and 1. Now, if there's a 1, then you can jump directly to your factors. So this is going to then factor out into x plus 4, x plus 1 equals 0. It should be pretty easy to factor. When you factor out the trinomial, this is called a trinomial here, you take the first number times the last number. Put it in the box. They need to, in this case, add together to give you that 5. We'll do a lot of these. Now, this is completely factored, isn't it? Nothing else will be factored out. Nothing can go any further. What are my 3 answers going to be? Let's find them. The first number, we factored an x out. So my first answer is going to be x equals 0. There's one of them. Okay, why is it x equals 0? Because of that. What about the next one? What's the next one going to be? Watch your signs. It's x plus 4 equals 0. So that means my second solution is x equals a what? Negative 4. And what about my last one here? The last one is x plus 1 equals 0. So what would my third and final answer be? Negative 1. So what are my 3 answers? 0, minus 4, minus 1. Is everyone okay with how I did that? You should be. I picked this one on purpose because it's easy to factor, and I wanted you to see if they have an x in common, what do you factor out? An x. Now, why did we get 3 solutions? Because our highest power is what? 3. So that tells you at most 3 solutions. You could have less than 3, but at most 3 in this case. So let's do some more factoring. These are all 0 factor. And let's look at one where we have to set it to 0. Let's do a negative 8 here. So these are going to be pretty easy. The first ones are pretty easy to factor. We'll make them a little bit more difficult as we progress on. But I want you to solve this one. How many solutions do you think this one's going to have? 2. Why 2 solutions? Because it's squared. So what do we need to do? Set this equal to what? 0. So we'll move that 8 over. Now we've got x squared minus 15x plus 8 equals 0. There's no number in front, so we put the 1 there. And then 1 times 8, well, that is a 8. Now let's talk about signs. I picked this one on purpose to make us think a little bit about signs. Since this is positive, since that 8 is positive, they are either both positive or both negative. Now, what's the sign in the middle? Negative. So what do we know about the signs? Are they positive or are they negative? They are both going to be what? Negative, right? Why? How can we multiply numbers together? Oh, wait a minute. Did I get the numbers mixed up? I should have been more careful. This isn't going to factor. Let me flip them around so it'll work here. Sorry. Let me rewrite it so it's in the right order. I put the 8 and the 15 in the wrong place. Let me rewrite this. Sorry about that. I wasn't thinking when I made it up. Let me just fix it real quick. This one won't factor. Sorry about that. I'll make sure it factors. I just put the 8 and the 15 in the wrong place. That's all I did. That was my mistake. Let me rewrite it so it'll factor. I just wasn't careful. And I mixed the 8 and the 15 up. Sorry about that. Okay, this one will. Sorry about that. Now, let me make sure it looks right here. Sorry about that, because I made something that wouldn't factor. This one will. Okay, sorry about that. So move that 15 over, and this one will factor. Now you'll see this one will factor. So this one will actually work. That was my mistake there. Okay, so when we go to work this one out, we put our 1 in front. And 1 times 15 is a 15. Now, what do we know about 15? Okay, 15 is positive. So since 15 is a positive number, they're either both positive or both negative. What's the sign in the middle? Negative. So what 2 numbers now are going to multiply together to give me 15, add together to give me 8? Okay? Yep, 5 and 3, right? And we know that they are both negative. Why? Because the sign in the middle is negative. And how can you get 2 numbers to multiply together to make it positive? Either both positive or both negative. So that would be a negative 5 and a negative 3. We can now jump to our factors, and that leaves you with x minus 5 as the first factor and x minus 3 as the second factor. So we factored it out. What would my answers be? X minus 5 equals 0. So my first one is going to be x equals now what? 5. Okay, so there's one solution. And what about the other one? Move that 3 over. So x minus 3 equals 0. So x equals now a what? Positive 3. So 5 and 3 are my solutions there. Now again, let's talk about our signs. Why are these both negative? Because that 15 is what? Positive. How can you get 2 numbers to multiply together to make it positive? Either both positive or both negative. So you know that. Then you look in the middle. What's the sign in the middle? negative. So you know they both have to be negative. And what numbers multiply together to give me 15, add together to give me 8, 5 and 3. And so you know they're negative. Let's do one more easy one, and then we'll look at some more complicated ones where we have to factor by grouping. So let's do one more of an easier one, and then we'll look at something that we have to factor by grouping. Let's do one that gives us a double root. Let's look at this one. Again, same directions, solve it. I picked this one because in some cases, you may only get one solution. So let's move that 36 over. And this is what's called a perfect square trinomial, because 36 is a perfect square, right? This is only going to give us one solution. Now it's squared, and that tells you at most. So the highest power is 2. That means you can have up to 2 solutions. You may not get 2 different ones, but you can have up to 2. Now, if I try to factor this one out, what do we have? First times the last again, that's a 36. What do we know about the signs? Both positive. Why are they both positive? 36 is positive. Sign in the middle is positive. And what two numbers multiply together to give me 36, add together to give me 12? 6 and 6, right? Well, these are the same. And in this case, we only have what? One unique solution. So x plus 6 equals 0. So x equals my only solution. X equals what? Negative 6. I also like to always write them out and move it over, because a lot of times students make a mistake and forget to change the signs. Okay? You only got one solution, right? Even though the highest power is 2. This is a double root. It's also called a perfect square trinomial. Now let's look at some where we have to factor by grouping. And let me come up with the middle term here. Let's do, how about I'll move that over. How about a negative 26x here. So we're going to work with this one. And this one's a little bit different. Okay, this one's going to require an extra step. So first things first, we're going to set this equal to what? 0. Now that is what we are going to do for zero factor and also the quadratic formula. The only time we don't set it to 0 is when we use zero, or not zero factor, when we use the square root property. So this one, we're going to use zero factor. So this one has to go to 0. So move the 9 over. And then we always look and make sure nothing comes out. We've got a 3, a 26, and a 9. Can any number come out? Is any number in common? No. Now, if that would have been a 27, you could factor a 3 out, right? But you can't in this case. So nothing's in common. First times the last. First times the last is a negative 27. And we haven't really seen this yet. It's a negative 27, so that means one number is positive, one number is negative. So if the middle number, the number in the box, in the middle of that box, if that number is negative, what do you know? you're either going to have you're going to have you're going to have one positive, one negative, right? Let's make sure I say it correctly. So that 27, that's a negative. One is positive, one is negative. Why? How is the only way that you can get two numbers to multiply together to give you negative? One has to be positive, right? One number has to be negative. Now we look at the sign in the middle. What's the sign in the middle? Negative 27. So that's the larger number. So the larger number is negative. Smaller number is positive. This one's pretty easy to factor. What two numbers are going to multiply together to give me that 27? Subtract from each other to give you 26. Do we know what numbers will work? Okay, pretty easy. 27 and what? 1. Why is it 27 negative? Because it's the larger number, and what's a sign in the middle? Negative. Now, this one's a little bit different from the others. Okay, the others, we were able to jump directly to our factors, right? This one's going to require us to factor by grouping, so it has an extra step. So what we're going to now do is we're going to factor this one by grouping. So we're going to split the middle up. So we keep the 3x squared. That stays the same. And then what about minus 26? Well, minus 26, that's a minus 27, right, plus 1. So that's a minus 27x plus an x minus 9 equals 0. So the last stays the same and the first stays the same. We split the middle up into our two pieces. So we split the middle into two pieces. Now we factor by grouping. So this is the way I teach, is factor by grouping. I think it's about the easiest way. You can also guess and check your solutions, but I like to factor by grouping. First two pieces. What can I factor out of the first two pieces here? Can someone tell me? 3, and not just a 3, it's a 3x. All right, and the x comes out, 3's cancel, so that leaves you with an x, and 27 divided by 3 is a negative, so that leaves you with an x minus 9. Now, what about the next two pieces? In some cases, nothing comes out. If nothing comes out, then we're going to factor out a 1, and that leaves you with an x minus 9. How do we know that we're on the right track? If we are on the right track, these parentheses should be the same. Are our parentheses exactly the same? Yes. So that's going to come out in front. So an x minus 9 comes out in front. And that's gone, and that's gone. And what is now left over? 3x plus 1 is left over because I covered it up. And what's left over? 3x plus 1, and that equals now what? 0. Right, is everyone okay with how I got to that point? We're going to do several of these. Now we've got it factored, so now we can solve it. So what would I get for my two solutions? The first one is x minus 9 equals 0, so x equals now what? 9. What about the other one? 3x plus 1 equals 0. So 3x equals negative 1. Divide by your 3. So x now equals a negative 1 third. Is everyone okay with that? Let's do a couple more of these zero factor. And I'm going to pick these from our textbook. So let me grab a few from our textbook. We're in 1.4. We'll do probably 2, maybe 3 more of these. Let's look now at question 18. This is on page 139. We'll look at question 18. This is a minus 6x squared. 7x equals negative 10. So what do I need to do first? Well, if I read the directions, it says solve with zero factor. So the first thing I need to do is just remember, zero factor. That means I've got to set it equal now to what? 0. So let's go ahead and set this equal to 0. Is everyone all right with that? Now this one does have one extra step, and it's not so important with zero factor, but you need to make sure you do this with the quadratic formula. Anytime we start off with an x squared, I want that x squared to be positive. So my x squared right now is negative, so let's switch our signs around. So I'm going to multiply and distribute through a negative in front. That is going to make sure that the x squared is positive. You just want to do that so that it's easier to work with. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. Set it to 0. I noticed it was a negative 6x squared, so I'm going to distribute that negative through, and that leaves me with a positive 6x squared, a minus 7x, and a minus 10 equals now 0. Okay, so we are now ready to factor. This one is going to also require us to factor by grouping because of the 6. So the 6 there makes us factor by grouping. So first things first, take the first times the last. 6 times a negative 10, well that is a negative what? 60. What do we know about the signs? Are they the same or are they different? What's the sign here? How can you multiply to get a negative? One positive, one negative, right? Because this is negative. We need one positive number and one negative number. And then we go back and we look in the middle. So what's the sign in the middle? Negative. So that means the larger number is negative, smaller number is what? Positive. Where do I begin? A lot of times students struggle with finding the numbers. So where do I begin here? Well, I begin with that 60, and I look at 60. What does 60 end in? 60 ends in a 0, right? So that means it's going to have a multiple of 5 or a multiple of 10 in it. So let's try 5. So 60, okay, 60 divided by 5. Let's see what we get here. 60 divided by 5 is 12. Okay? And what do we know about 12 minus 5? What's 12 minus 5? 7. And isn't that what I want? Yes. So what are my two numbers? Negative 15 and positive what? I divided, sorry, not 15, 60. We divide that by 5, right? Should be I just wrote down the wrong number. Negative 12 and positive what? 5. Those go together to give you what? Negative 7, right? Negative 12 times positive 5. That multiplies together to give you the negative 60. Minus 12 plus 5. That gives you the negative 7. Can we jump to our factors? No. We have to do factor by grouping. So let's split this up. So now we've got 6x squared. Okay. We've got a minus 12x from here. We have a positive 5x. And just bring down the negative 10. What can come out of the first two pieces? Okay, 6x comes out. And when I take that 6x out, that leaves you now with an x minus 2, doesn't it? Now we look at the next two pieces. What can I factor out of the next two pieces here? Okay, it looks like a 5. Okay, positive 5 will come out. And what is that going to leave me with? Minus 2. Okay, now we take a moment to make sure we're on the right track. How do we know that we're on the right track? Well, they had better be the same in the parentheses. Are my parentheses the same? Yes. So therefore I know I'm doing it correctly. So how do we finish it out? We know these are the same, right? So that's going to come out in front as an x minus 2. What's left over? Yep, 6x plus 5 is left over. And what does that equal? That equals 0. Now we can finish it. So we've got x minus 2 equals 0. So my first solution is x equals 2. Easy enough there. And what about the other one? What is it going to be? 6x plus 5 equals 0. So 6x equals a negative 5. We'll divide by our 6. And that leaves me with x equaling now negative 5 sixths. Those are my two solutions there. Let's do another one. How about we look at, I'll just make up one that's a little bit more difficult. So I'll just make up one because the ones in textbook, most of those are pretty easy. Let me make up one more that's a little bit more challenging. Something that'll work here. Let's see. How about we make it minus 11x in the middle. So this one will have a little bit more challenging numbers. Not much, but it should still be pretty easy to deal with and factor. Okay, we're going to try to solve this again. Make sure it works. I just want to do one more check before I give it to you to make sure it works. It should work. Okay, so solve it. What do we need to do? We need to set this equal to what? 0. I didn't want to make the numbers too large, but I still wanted them to be a little bit more of a challenge to factor. And now we've got 3x squared. We've got a minus 11x. We've got a minus 14, and that equals 0. And I'm going to let you tell me what goes in each place. So what's going to go over here in this box? Can someone tell me? What goes here? Okay, minus 42, isn't it? Right? Because 3 times that negative 14, that makes it a minus 42. Is everyone okay with that? Now, tell me what the signs are going to be. Are the signs going to be the same, or are the signs going to be different? Which one? Different. Why are they going to be different? Because that is negative, right? So that tells me now, one number's positive, one number's negative. Which one is larger, the positive number or the negative number? Negative number. Why? Because negative is in the middle. So negative and positive. So can someone now tell me what two numbers multiply together to give me 42, subtract from each other to give you 11? Someone said it. We need a negative 14, right? And a positive what? 3. I didn't want to make the numbers too hard to factor because most in cases you'll have easy numbers. They're not going to be much larger than this. And this one did make you think a little bit with the 42. We need to finish it. So what do we now do? We now take this minus 11 and we split it up. This is what we call split the middle. And this is now 3x squared. Write your numbers. First number goes first, so that's a minus 14x. And we have a positive 3x minus 14, And that equals now what? 0. Okay, we need to finish this out. What can I factor out of the first two pieces here? Can someone tell me? Yep, all I can factor out is an x, and that leaves me with 3x minus what? 14. The next two pieces, well, this already matches up, doesn't it? If nothing factors out, you always need to factor out that 1. So factor out that 1. And now let's take a moment to make sure we're on the right track. Are we on the right track, do you think? Yep. Okay. So these are the same. So that's going to now leave you with 3x minus 14. X plus 1, and that equals 0. And what are my two solutions going to be? Now, students make mistakes with signs, so always write it out. That way you don't make a sign error. So 3x minus 14 equals 0. So move that 14 over. So 3x equals a positive 14. We'll divide by our 3. And that leaves you now with x equaling 14 over what? 14 over 3. What about the other one? X plus 1 equals 0. I can write it out right. So x plus 1 equals 0. So that leaves you then with, when you move it over, x equaling now what? X equals now negative. I'm going to work out number 11 from your homework, just to make sure we can work one of these more complicated ones out. Number 11, by the way, is the hardest. All the others are quite a bit easier than number 11. And this one is just difficult because of the larger numbers. And this is the homework. So question number 11 from your homework. I'm going to work out this one completely, and then we'll talk about question 12, because I want you to see how to factor things out of 12. So question number 11. First off, I check. Can I factor anything out of here? No. 3 won't go into any of them, all of them. So I cannot factor out a 3. I can't factor out a 5. Nothing factors. This one's going to give you larger numbers. But we're going to talk through it. And you're going to find the numbers for me. Now you may need a calculator here. What's going to go inside of this box? Use a calculator if you need to. 1050, right? Okay. Now, what do we know about the signs? Are they different or are they the same? These are the same. Let's make sure we understand the concepts. Are my signs, since they are the same, are they both positive or are they both negative? Which one? Positive. Why are they both positive? Because the middle's positive. Now, how do we find the numbers? Well, what do we know about 1050? Okay, 1050 ends in a 0. So that tells me it has to have a 5 or a 10 in it. A multiple of 5 or a multiple of 10. We'll start with 10. And we'll see how close we get. And then we'll keep going until we find it. So we've got our 1050 here. Okay, let's try 10. 1050 divided by 10. 10 and 105. Does that give me my 67? Nope. So let's go up to 15. So 1050. We'll divide that by 15. 15 and 70. Does that give us our 67? Nope. Okay. We're getting closer though, right? Let's now try 20. 20 doesn't go in there. Let's try 25. Okay, 25 and 42. Does that work for us? Let's check. What is 25 plus 42? Well, 25 plus 42 is what? 67. So what would my two numbers be? 25 and 42, isn't it? 1050, divide that by 25. Make sure I got the right numbers. Yep, 25 and 42. Do you see how I found it though? So where did I begin? If you've got a number like this, where do you begin? You look at the number. If the number's even, you start with multiples of 2 until you find it. If the number's odd at the end, so if that last digit is odd, you might try 3, 7, 11, things like that, right? If it ends in a 0, it has to have a 5 or a 10 in it. If it ends in a 5, it's got to have a 5 in it. So this one ended in a 0. So I started with 10, it didn't work. I went to 15, didn't work. I tried 20, wouldn't even go into that, but 25 did work. So do you see how I figured that out? I look at the number, and that tells me where to begin. Even numbers start with 2. Odd numbers start with 3 and then move to 7. Ends in a 0, has to be a factor of 10 or 5. So try 10 and 5. If it ends in a 5, try multiples of 5. Now, are we done yet? No. Because of that 30, what do I need to do? Split it up. So now we've got 30x squared. We have a 25x. We've got a 42x and a 35. Now we have to factor it by grouping. So what can we factor out of the first two? Can someone tell me? Yep, x and what else? Yep, 5x can come out. All right, and if I factor out a 5x, then I've got 30 divided by 5. Well, that makes it a 6x there. And 25 divided by 5, that makes it a 5, and the x is gone. What about the next two pieces? Yep, looks like I can take out a 7, can't I? So let's take out that 7, and that leaves you now with 42 divided by 7, makes it a 6x. 35 divided by 7, well, that would be a what? 5. Now, how do I know that I'm on the right track? These had better be the same. Are these groupings exactly the same? Yes. If they are exactly the same, then we can factor it out. If they are different, we made a mistake. So that is then 6x plus 5. And what's left over? 5x plus 7. Now it's been factored. And now you can solve it. So let's go ahead and get our two solutions here. So we've got 6x plus 5 equals 0. So 6x equals negative 5. And so x now equals a negative 5/6. And what's the other one? 5x plus 7 equals 0. So 5x equals a negative 7. Divide by the 5. And now we've got x equaling a negative 7 what? 7/5. Now, question 12, I'm going to get you started on it because I want you to see something out of question 12. I specifically picked question 12 to show you how you can make your life easier. I'm not going to finish question 12. I'm going to get you started on it. Okay, so question 12. Now, first thing, directions. What do the directions say? Zero factor. So what do we need to do? Set this to 0. We need to get these numbers as small as possible. So always look at the numbers and see if there's something in common. Do you see a number that's in common with a 2, a 30, and a 100? Is there a number that can divide out into 2, 30, and 100? They all have a 2 in common, okay? Now, if they all have a 2 in common, or 3, or whatever number it might be, divide out that number. So divide everything by a 2. In this case. That is going to make your numbers get smaller because everything is divisible by 2. Also, it makes it so that you don't have to use factor by grouping. It makes it a much easier question. So the 2's cancel, and that leaves you with an x squared. Minus 30 over 2, well, that leaves you with a minus 15x. 100 over 2, well, that leaves you with 50, and that now equals what? 0. You can finish it from here. I wanted to show you that if you have a number that's in common, divide it out. Never divide by x, though. Never, ever divide by x. You'll lose a solution. But you can divide by numbers if they have it in common. So all of these had a 2 in common. And look at this. Now, I don't even have to factor by grouping. Because now I can just simply look at that and say, first times the last, factored out. I'm not going to tell you what they are, but you could factor out your own. Get the 2 solutions. You're not going to have to break it up and do factor by grouping because it saves you a lot of work. So whenever you see something that has a number in common, when it's equal to 0, divide it out. So that now finishes up 0 factor. Next, we're going to look at the quadratic formula. We're still in 1-4. Now we're going to look at the quadratic formula. So we're now going to look at the quadratic formula. And this is going to go with your homework. 6 through 10. Okay, so 6 through 10. So I didn't give you very many, but we do need to make sure we understand how to use what's called the quadratic formula. Now, for the quadratic formula, your equation must look like this. It must look like ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Has to look like that. And we're going to use what's called the quadratic formula. This is our quadratic formula. X equals minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So this is called our quadratic formula. So we're going to use this to solve things that we couldn't solve before. If you remember a little bit ago, I did make a mistake when I wrote it up, right, with the 0 factor. And I'm going to show you how to solve this because I gave this to you earlier and we couldn't solve it. So earlier, I gave you this, x squared minus 15x equals minus 8. And we're going to solve this with the quadratic formula. This is the one, remember, I made a mistake on at the very beginning. I wrote the numbers in the wrong order, and I couldn't solve it with zero factor, right? This one will not factor. However, you can solve it with the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula lets us solve every type of equation. It's a quadratic. Doesn't matter if it's factorable or not, we can always use the quadratic formula. So this one's not going to factor. Remember, I gave it to you at the beginning. I made a mistake when I wrote it down. We couldn't solve it. Now I'm going to show you how to use the quadratic formula and solve it. Okay, so first thing we need to do with the quadratic formula is it needs to look like this. So, does ours look like that quite yet? No. What do we need to do? Yep, set it to 0. Always, always set it to 0 first. So now it's set to 0. We're going to get the pieces. If there's no number in front of the x squared, you put a 1 there. And we're going to label out each part. And make sure you see that that's a negative 15 there. I want to make sure we don't lose our signs. So let's label all the pieces. So in this case, A is 1, B is a negative 15, and C is 8. I'm going to slow down so we don't go through this too quickly. So let's recap what we did. First off, we set it equal to what? 0. Then we labeled our A, our B, and our C. Now what I always like to do is I always like to rewrite the formula. Every time I use a formula, I write that formula up right next to it so I can see where all the parts go. So now we can fill it in. We're going to have to be very, very careful with double negatives because a lot of times that's where students make a mistake. It's either in the double negatives or when you square a negative. So let's rewrite this. We need negative b. So that is a negative of a negative 15. Right? So that's the b part, negative b. Watch out for the double negative. That's a commonly made mistake. And then we have a plus or minus. And we've got the square root of, let's write it out here, b squared. So that's a minus 15 squared. And then we've got a minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 8, all over 2 times 1. The quadratic formula is really not that difficult to use and work with. However, you want to take your time and make sure you don't make mistakes with the signs. And I'm going to rewrite it, and then we'll do the discriminant on its own. So what do we know about the double negative here? Okay, that double negative is that's going to make that a positive. So let's write out what we've got. We've got a 15. Okay, then we've got our plus or minus. We'll deal with the root in a moment. You have to separate things out in pieces. And 2 times 1, that's a 2. Now let's work with the discriminant. What is the discriminant? The discriminant is what's under the root. So the discriminant is everything that's underneath that square root. And in this case, what do we have? We've got a minus 15 squared. And then we have a minus 4 times 1 times 8. So here's how you do it. You write up your formula. Plug your pieces in. And then I clean it up a little bit here. So double negative, made that positive. 2 times 1 is 2. Now, I look at my discriminant and I do it separately. So the discriminant is what's underneath that square root. So we've got now a minus 15 quantity squared. We've got a minus 4 times 1 times 8. Be careful with your signs. What happens when I square a negative number? It becomes positive. So negative 15 squared, that would then be a positive 225. Then we've got a single negative here, and that's 8 times 4, which is at 32. And now we've got 225 minus 32. That comes out to be 193. Is everyone okay with that so far? Now we need to check to see if we can break it down any. Always have to check and see if it can factor down any further, because it may or it may not be able to be factored. Let's take 193. It ends in a 3. Can I divide that by 3? Will 3 go in there? No. 193. Let's try a 7. 7 go in there? No. 193. We can try a 11. That won't go in there. I don't think it's going to factor down at all, will it? 15 won't go in there. 17 won't go in there. Okay. 193. Is it going to break down? No. So 193 is prime. So it's not going to go any further. So what is my final answer then? My final answer is this over here. But you always have to check and make sure that it can't break down. In some cases, that 193 might be able to be broken down. Remember how we broke those down in 1-3 with the square roots? Okay, you've got to make sure you can't break them down. Sometimes they'll break down, sometimes they won't. Why does it not have an I? If that would have been a minus 193, what would it come out? What would come out with it? An I. Okay, so make sure you remember that. You never want to put fractions in the quadratic formula. So we're going to do now 2 more with the quadratic formula. These are going to have fractions. If you have fractions, you simply clear them out. So let's start with this one. Okay, so I want you to solve it. You can either clear the fractions out at the beginning, or you can clear the fractions out at the end. Let's go ahead and clear the fractions out. What do I need to multiply this by to get rid of my fractions? Does anyone know? Well, what do I need to multiply everything by? Multiply this all by what? Not 7, a little bit larger. How about 14? Okay, someone said 14. Why 14? Because 14 is my least common denominator, right? We'll clear that one out right there. So if you have fractions, you need to get rid of them. So 14 divided by 7. 14 divided by 7 is a 2. 2 times 3 makes it a 6x squared. 14 and 14 cancels out. That leaves you with an x. And do not forget the other side. 14 times 3. 14 times 3, well, that is a 42. Is everyone all right with how I cleared them out? So, fractions, what do? Clear them out. Now, we want to solve this with the quadratic formula. So, this needs to be moved over, right? So, let's go ahead and move that 42 over. So now we've got 6x squared plus x minus 42 equals 0. It's not going to factor. We want to use the quadratic formula. Is it set up in the right order? Yes. There's your A. There's your B. If there's no number, we put a 1. And what about the C? That's the negative 42. I like to circle negative just so I don't lose that sign. It's so easy to do. So now A is 6, B is 1, C is negative 42. I always like to write up my quadratic formula. so I can plug the pieces in. I think it's easier if you write it up. That way you can see where all the pieces and the parts go. So my formula is x equals minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, let's now go ahead and plug in our values. Again, be careful with that b. So what do we have? We have a b is a 1, so that's going to be a minus 1. And then we've got our plus or minus. We've got the square root of b squared, so that's 1 squared minus 4 times a, which is the 6, c, which is that minus 42, and that's all going to be over 2 times 6 there. So nothing really to clean up. So we've got x equals now a negative 1. Then we've got our plus or minus. We'll put our square root here. We'll come back to that in a moment. 2 times 6, well, that is a what? 2 times 6, that's a 12. And we're going to work with our discriminant by itself. What's our discriminant? 1 squared. Minus 4 times 6 times a minus 42. Okay. What do we know about the discriminant? Let's start, look at our signs here. What do we know about a negative times a negative here? Negative times a negative makes it a what? Positive. So 1 squared is 1. 2 negatives makes that a positive. And now we just simply multiply. We've got 4 times 6 times that 42. And that gives you 1,008. Okay, we'll add those together, and that's going to be 1,009. Now, it may or may not break up. Let's see if it'll break up. Because we've got 1,009 here. We're going to see if it's going to break down anymore. 1,009 ends in 9. So let's see if a 3 goes into that. 3 does not go into there. 1,009. Okay, let's try how about a 7? 7 go in there? No. 1,009. Let's try a 13. Does 13 go in there? Nope. I don't think anything will. It's 1,009. We'll try it with 17. Doesn't work. 21's not going to go in there. I don't think 19 will either. Right? So is 1,009, is that going to factor in any further? No. So 1,009, that is prime. Now, they may factor out. This one just doesn't. So there is your final answer. Won't factor out any further. I'm going to now work out questions 8 from your homework. And then I'll pass out the sign-in sheet. So once I get question 8 wrote up from your homework, this will be the last one. And I'll go ahead and pass out the sign-in sheet for you to sign. Okay, let me find the sign-in sheet. Sign-in sheet. You're welcome. Okay, now, where would I begin on this one? Can I have fractions? No. Does anyone have any idea how I would clear out these fractions? Anyone got any idea on what to do? Yeah, we're going to have to multiply by something. What are we going to multiply by? Not 10. Okay, look in my denominator. Look at the numbers down below. Well, we can use an x, but not just an x. We actually need an x squared. because that's our highest power. So we're going to multiply all this by an x squared. Why an x squared? Well, let's see what happens when I do that. If I use the correct factor, all the fractions should cancel out. So x squared times 6, well, that's a 6x squared. Nothing new there. Now, what happens with the next one? We still have a minus 10. But what about the x squared? When we divide it by an x. So we've got x squared. Take out an x. That leaves you with a single x. That's okay. And what about the last piece? The x squared and the x squared, they do what? Cancel out. And that leaves you with a minus 1, doesn't it? So if we need to get rid of a variable in the denominator, how do we do that? Multiply it by the highest power. Our highest power was x squared, and that got rid of all of it. Now what can we do? We want to use the quadratic formula, so what would I do next here? Where would I begin? Okay, someone said it. Set to 0. Right? So it's going to be set to 0. Now let's see if we can work this one out. There's your A, there's your B, and there is your C. So A is 6, B is 10, C is 1. Write up your formula. And fill it in. So now we've got x equals, and we've got a negative 10 plus or minus. We've got the square root of 10 squared minus 4, a which is 6, c which is 1. These numbers are a little bit smaller, over 2 times the 6th. And this one's going to force us to reduce it down. This one will break down. I can tell you this right now. So the others did not. This one will. Let's rewrite it. And we've got a negative 10 plus or minus. We've got a square root here. And 2 times 6, that's a 12. What about our discriminant? That's 10 squared minus 4 times 6 times 1. 10 squared is 100. 4 times 6 is a 24. Okay, we're almost done here. We'll finish right on time. So 100 minus that 24, that is a 76, isn't it? Right? Because 4, yep. A, C. So 4 times that 6, that makes it a 24. And 100 minus that 24, that's a 76. And what do we know about 76? Can 76 break down? I think it can. 76, it's an even number, so let's try a 4. Well, if I use a 4, that's 4 and 19. And does 4 break down? Yes, 4 is a perfect square of what? 2. So that's going to come out. Now we'll rewrite it, and then we'll make sure our answer matches up with the key. So now we'll rewrite this as a minus 10 plus or minus. 2 comes out, and what's left over? 19 over 12. Now, that does not match up with any of the solutions. Right? None of them look like that, do they? Because these have 5s. Okay, but this one's over 12. But that's still not the right one, because that's got a 5, we've got a 10. That one has a 10, but ours is over 12. How do we make this look like one of the solutions? How do we reduce it down? Yeah, we've got to look and see what we can do. And there's different ways of approaching it. Let's split it up. I'm going to split it up into 2 separate parts. Now, if I split this up, so this is what I've got here, okay, and I split it up. Now, once you see that it's been split up, what can I reduce? 10 over 12, what does that reduce down into? Minus 5/6, right? What about the 12 and the 2 here? That can reduce down, and that gives you 19 squared root of 19 over what? 6. Are these denominators the same? Yes. So these can now be put back together. And that way it'll look like what they've got. So putting it back together, you now have minus 5 plus or minus the square root of 19. And what's my new denominator? 6. So there's your final finished answer. And does that match up with one of the key? Yes, it does. Okay, let's talk about our homework quickly. And then I'll let you go to lunch. So for your homework, the homework, you should be able to finish up all of 1-4. So you should be able to finish up 1-4. You should be able to do them all. What's due on Tuesday is going to be 1-3. If you've got 1-2 done, I'll collect that today. I also have your 1-1 homework graded. So if you turned in 1-1 from last time,